Kwame, a billionaire CEO, had built his empire from nothing. He was respected, feared, and admired, but he carried one rule in his heart: never let love distract him. For 10 years he lived only for work. His days were full of meetings, contracts, and investments. His nights were spent in silence, staring at the city lights through the glass walls of his penthouse. He was surrounded by wealth, but loneliness sat with him like an uninvited guest. His heart was locked, guarded by memories of betrayal in his younger days. Back then he had loved a woman deeply, but she had chosen his best friend over him, leaving him with pain so sharp that he had promised never to let emotions rule him again. So Kwame built walls around his heart. He told himself that love was weakness. He told himself that only money and power could not betray. His empire grew, but the silence in his life grew with it. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he decided to take a different road home. He wanted to escape the polished restaurants and business dinners he was used to. His driver pulled over near a small, humble restaurant tucked in the corner of a quiet street. Kwame stepped inside. The place smelled of fresh stew and fried plantain. It was not glamorous, but it was alive with laughter and chatter. Families ate together, friends shared meals, and children ran around. He sat quietly at a corner table, wearing a simple jacket to avoid being recognized. A young waitress approached him. Her name tag read Abina. She was simple, kind, and hardworking. Her hair was neatly tied back, and though her shoes were worn out, her smile shone brightly. "Good evening, sir," she said warmly. "What would you like to eat?" Kwame looked up at her, and for the first time in years, something stirred in his chest. Her voice was gentle, her smile full of warmth he had long forgotten. He quickly lowered his eyes, reminding himself of his rule: no distractions. But that night, he found himself watching her as she moved around the restaurant. She carried heavy trays with ease, greeted each customer with respect, and bent down to listen patiently to an old man who complained about his soup. When a child spilled a drink, she rushed with a cloth, smiling to calm the mother. Kwame's food arrived. It was simple: jollof rice and grilled chicken, but it tasted better than the expensive meals he ate at five-star hotels. As he ate, he glanced at Abina again. Something about her presence made the noisy restaurant feel strangely peaceful. When he finished, she returned to his table. "Did you enjoy your food, sir?" He nodded. "Yes. It was good." She smiled again, and that smile lingered in his mind even after he left. That night, as he sat in his silent penthouse, he thought of her. It annoyed him. He had spent years training his mind not to think of anyone, not to let any face disturb his peace. Yet, Abina's face returned again and again, her smile breaking through the silence. The next evening, without planning, he found himself driving back to the same restaurant. Again she was there, carrying trays, smiling at customers. And again he sat quietly, watching her from his corner table. This time Abina recognized him. "You came back," she said, surprised. Kwame nodded. "Yes. The food was good." She laughed softly. "Well, we're glad to have you again. I'll bring your order." And so it began. Kwame started visiting the restaurant more often. Each time he told himself it was only for the food, only for the change of environment. But deep down he knew the truth: he came back for her. Abina was different from the women he had known in his world of wealth. She was not dressed in diamonds or designer clothes. She did not speak of money or status. Instead, she spoke of simple things: her younger brother's school, her mother's health, her dream of one day opening a small bakery. Kwame listened more than he spoke. In her presence, he found himself relaxing. She laughed easily, and sometimes she even teased him gently. No one ever teased him. People in his business life only feared him or tried to please him. Abina treated him like an ordinary man, and strangely he liked it. One night, as he left the restaurant, she called out to him. "Sir," she said, handing him a small paper bag. "This is some bread I baked today. Take it home." He looked at the bag, then at her. "You baked this?" She nodded. "Yes. It's not perfect, but I'm learning. My dream is to open a bakery one day." Kwame took the bag, feeling something warm spread in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. That night he ate the bread alone in his penthouse. It was soft, a little uneven in shape, but it tasted of effort, care, and love. It was the best bread he had ever eaten. For the first time in many years he smiled to himself. Days turned into weeks, and Kwame kept returning. Abina began to notice his silence, his careful eyes, the way he seemed to carry a heavy weight on his shoulders. One evening, when the restaurant was less crowded, she asked softly, "You always look so serious, sir. Do you ever laugh?" Kwame was caught off guard. "I laugh," he said stiffly. Abina tilted her head, her eyes playful. I haven't seen it yet. For a moment, Kwame stared at her. Then, without meaning to, a small chuckle escaped him. It was awkward, rusty, but it was laughter. Abina's eyes lit up. There. See. You can laugh. Kwame shook his head, but his lips curved into a smile. And in that moment he realized something frightening. His rule was breaking. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crumble. That night, when he returned home, the silence no longer felt the same. It was filled with her voice, her laughter, her smile. For years, silence had been his companion. Now, silence felt empty without her. Kwame sat by the window looking at the city lights. For the first time in 10 years, he asked himself a question he had buried long ago. Is it possible, he whispered, that I could love again? The thought scared him. But it also filled him with hope. And so, the man who had sworn never to let love distract him found himself drawn, night after night, to a small restaurant, to a simple waitress whose smile carried warmth he had long forgotten. Abina moved from table to table, her steps light and steady. She carried trays filled with plates of steaming food, balancing them with ease. Her smile never faded, even when customers were rude or demanding. She greeted each person with the same respect, whether it was a businessman in a fine suit or a tired mother with children pulling at her dress. Kwame sat quietly in his corner, his eyes following her without meaning to. He told himself he had come back only for the food. The jollof rice was good, the chicken tender, the soup rich with spices. But he knew that was not the real reason. The truth was harder to admit. He came because of her. Abina was different. She did not treat him like others did. She did not look at him with fear or hunger for his wealth. In fact, she did not know who he truly was. To her, he was just a man who came to eat, a man who sat silently in the corner watching the world. She spoke to him as she spoke to everyone, kindly, openly, with no hidden motive. That made her special. Kwame had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His money, his influence, his name. They praised him, flattered him, but he knew it was not real. He had grown used to the fake smiles, the careful words, the admiration that was more fear than love. But Abina's laughter was soft, natural, and real. Her words were sincere. When she asked him if he enjoyed his meal, she truly wanted to know. When she smiled, it was not because she wanted something from him, it was simply who she was. For the first time in years, Kwame felt something stir inside him. It was small at first, like a spark in a long-dead fire. But every evening he returned to the restaurant, the spark grew brighter. At first, he sat in silence, answering only when she spoke to him. But little by little, their conversations grew. One evening, as she placed a plate before him, she asked, "Do you always eat alone?" Kwame looked at her, surprised by the question. "Yes," he answered shortly. She tilted her head, curious. "What?" "Food tastes better when shared." Kwame gave a small, humorless smile. "I'm used to eating alone." Abina nodded gently, not pressing him further. "Well, as long as you enjoy the food, that is something." Her simple words lingered in his mind long after he left. He realized how strange it was. He had shared tables with leaders, investors, and celebrities, yet not once had he felt the comfort he felt in this small restaurant, speaking with a waitress who treated him like an ordinary man. The next week he visited again. This time, Abina noticed his tired eyes. "You look like you have been carrying the whole world on your shoulders," she said softly. Kwame raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" "Yes," she replied with a small smile. "But you should rest sometimes. Even the strongest tree needs rain." Her words touched him. No one had spoken to him like that in years. People always expected him to be unshakable, the man with answers, the man who never broke. But here was a young woman reminding him gently that he, too, was human. Slowly, Kwame found comfort in her honesty. She did not try to impress him. She spoke of her own life, her struggles, her dreams. She told him about her younger brother, who wanted to be a teacher, and her mother, who prayed every night for better days. She spoke about how she wanted to open a bakery one day, how she practiced baking bread late at night after her long shifts. Kwame listened. He rarely listened to anyone, but with Abina he wanted to. Her words were simple, but they carried truth. Her life was hard, but she did not complain. Instead, she smiled through it, carrying her burdens with grace. And he admired that. Each night, after leaving the restaurant, he thought about her. In his penthouse, surrounded by silence and glass walls, he remembered her voice, her laughter, the way she moved from table to table, giving her best to everyone. One night, as he sat by his window, he realized something. For the first time in 10 years, he was not thinking about numbers, deals, or power. He was thinking about a woman. It scared him. He tried to remind himself of his rule. Never let love distract him. Love had betrayed him once and he had promised never to fall again. But the more he repeated the rule, the weaker it felt. Abina was not like the woman who had hurt him. She was not asking for his wealth or his world. She gave without expecting. She smiled without pretending. And slowly she was breaking the walls he had built. The more he visited, the more she noticed his small changes. He began speaking more, asking about her day, telling her little things about himself, though never the truth about his empire. To her, he was still just a quiet man who liked simple food. One evening, when the restaurant was less crowded, Abina sat for a moment at his table. "You come here often," she said with a smile. "Do you not have friends or family to eat with?" Kwame hesitated. His world was full of people, yet none of them felt like family. "No," he answered finally. "I do not." Abina looked at him, her eyes soft. "That must be lonely." He wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat. For the first time in years he admitted quietly, "Yes, it is." Abina nodded gently. "Well, if you keep coming here, maybe you will not feel so lonely anymore." Her words were simple, but they struck deep. That night Kwame could not sleep. He lay awake, thinking of her smile, her kindness, her gentle way of seeing him as more than the image the world knew. The man who had sworn never to love again now found himself looking forward to the evenings, not for the food, but for the chance to hear her voice, to see her smile, to feel less alone. Kwame was beginning to understand something he had long forgotten. Sometimes, comfort does not come from wealth, but from the warmth of another heart. And that warmth was Abina. News traveled fast as it always did. At first, only a few people noticed the quiet billionaire who visited the small restaurant again and again. But soon whispers spread through the city. Why would a man like Kwame, the famous CEO, spend so much time in a poor diner? His relatives began to talk. His business partners shook their heads. They could not understand. A man of his status was expected to dine in the finest places, surrounded by the rich and powerful. He was supposed to marry a woman of equal wealth, someone who could add to his image and strengthen his empire. "Kwame," one of his uncles said sharply during a family gathering, "people are beginning to talk. You must be careful. A man in your position cannot be seen with a waitress." "Yes," another relative added quickly. "What would investors think if they heard you were spending your nights in a small restaurant instead of meeting with important people? You must protect your name. A CEO must marry someone from the right background." Kwame listened in silence, his face calm but his eyes hard. He had spent years listening to people telling him what he must do, how he must live. But this time something in him refused to bend. "I know who I am," he said firmly, "and I will decide where I go." His relatives exchanged uneasy looks. They knew his temper when challenged. But still the whispers continued. Even in the business world questions rose. "Why is Kwame wasting his time there?" some asked. "Is he losing focus? Has he forgotten his place?" Kwame ignored them all. He had built his empire alone, and he would not let anyone dictate his heart. But though he was strong against the outside voices, he could not control the doubts creeping into Abina's mind. Abina had begun to hear the whispers too. Customers mentioned it while eating at the restaurant. Some laughed, some sneered. "Why would a billionaire want to sit here?" they said. "Why would he waste time with a poor girl like her?" At first she brushed it off. She told herself that Kwame came because he enjoyed the food, because he liked the peace of the small diner. But the more she thought, the more her heart grew heavy. One night after her shift, she sat with him at his usual corner table. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "You should not come here anymore," she said softly. Kwame looked at her, surprised. "Why not?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Because you belong to a world I cannot reach. People are talking. They say you should not waste time here. And they are right. I'm only a poor waitress. I have nothing to offer you." Her voice trembled as she spoke. She did not want to push him away, but she felt it was the truth. He was a man of power and wealth. She was just a girl serving food in a small restaurant. How could their worlds ever join? Kwame was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his eyes steady, his voice strong. "Abina," he said firmly, "do not speak like that. You think you are poor, but you are richer than many I know. Richer in kindness, richer in truth, richer in heart. That is what I need, not money, not status, not empty titles. You give me something no one else can." Abina looked at him, her eyes wide. His words felt like fire in her heart. But still doubt lingered. "Your family, your partners, they will never accept me." Kwame's expression hardened. "I did not build my empire by asking for permission. I will not choose my happiness by asking for approval. She opened her mouth to argue, but he shook his head. Listen to me, Abina. For 10 years I lived in silence. I had wealth, but I had no joy. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. Do you think I will let whispers take that away? Her chest tightened as she listened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to his words. But the weight of the world around them was heavy. The days that followed were not easy. Some customers whispered louder when Kwame came in. Some even mocked her behind her back. Her fellow workers teased her gently, asking when she would be moving into a mansion. Abina smiled at their jokes, but inside she worried. At night, when she lay on her bed, she thought of his world: bright lights, fine clothes, endless wealth. She thought of her own: long hours, tired feet, and little money to spare. Could someone like her really stand beside someone like him? Kwame noticed her growing silence. One evening, he found her sitting alone in the back of the restaurant, staring at the floor. What troubles you? He asked softly. She shook her head. Nothing. He sat beside her. Do not lie to me. Tell me. Tears filled her eyes, though she tried to hide them. I'm afraid. Afraid that your world and mine will never fit together. Afraid that one day you will regret this. Kwame reached out, gently lifting her chin so she met his gaze. His voice was steady, each word sharp with truth. Abina, I have faced men stronger than armies. I have fought battles with words, with contracts, with power. But I have never been afraid of anyone as much as I am afraid of losing you. Do you understand? You are not my weakness, you are my strength. If I stand with you, I stand taller than I ever have before. Abina's tears fell freely then. For the first time she allowed herself to believe him. She realized that wealth did not define worth. He had everything, yet he had chosen her, not for what she could give in gold, but for what she carried in her heart. That night, as she walked home under the quiet stars, she felt lighter. The whispers were still there, the doubts still strong, but Kwame's words echoed louder. You are richer than many I know. And deep inside, a new hope began to grow. As the days passed, Kwame's bond with Abina grew stronger. He no longer cared about the whispers, no longer feared what people said. He had made his choice. One evening, he looked at her across the small restaurant table and said softly, It is time you see my world. Abina hesitated. Her heart raced at his words. She was proud of who she was, but she knew her simple life was nothing like his. Still, Kwame's eyes carried a firmness that told her he would not let her hide forever. The following week, he invited her to a business dinner held in one of the grandest hotels in the city. Abina wore her best dress, though it was plain compared to the glittering gowns of the other women. She kept her hair neatly tied and carried herself with quiet dignity. When she entered with Kwame, the hall grew silent for a moment. The contrast was sharp. Among jewels and diamonds she looked simple. Among loud laughter and polished arrogance, her soft voice seemed almost too gentle. Some people whispered immediately. Who is she? One woman asked, raising an eyebrow. A waitress? Another sneered quietly. Surely this cannot be serious. But Kwame stood proudly beside her. His hand rested on hers as he introduced her with calm confidence. This is Abina, he said. She is someone special to me. The words carried across the hall like a stone dropped into water. Some smiled politely, some exchanged glances, and some mocked silently. But Kwame did not care. He had never been a man to hide behind masks, and he would not hide now. As the evening continued, Abina spoke little, but when she did, her words were honest and thoughtful. While others spoke of wealth, power, and deals, she asked simple questions about families, children, and community. At first, many ignored her. But slowly, if you listened, they were struck by the way she spoke without pride, without pretending, and yet with a wisdom that felt rare in that hall. Kwame watched her with pride. He knew people judged her dress, her voice, her background. But to him she shone brighter than anyone there. After that night, Kwame no longer attended events alone. Abina walked beside him, through business meetings, through dinners, through the glittering halls of power. People continued to talk, but Kwame's pride in her silenced many. Still, Abina never let the glamour change her. She remained the same woman who worked long hours, cared for her family, and dreamed of a bakery. She often told Kwame, Your world is beautiful, but it is not mine. What matters is how we use it. And slowly her humility began to change him. Kwame had always been focused on building his empire. His mind was sharp, his strategies ruthless, his goals clear. But love had been absent, and kindness had been a stranger. He believed money was only for power, and power was only for control. Abina questioned that. Kwame, she said one evening as they sat in his penthouse. You have so much. But how many children go to bed hungry in this city? How many schools are broken? How many workers struggle while you grow richer? Kwame frowned. I have built my company. I provide jobs. Yes, Abina said gently, but jobs alone are not enough. A man with your power can do more. You can change lives not just for your workers, but for their children and their children after them. Her words sank deep into his heart. He was not used to anyone challenging him with such honesty. But instead of anger he felt something else, respect. From that day he began to see his empire differently. With Abina's encouragement he funded schools in poor neighborhoods. He created scholarships for children who had no hope of education. He improved working conditions in his factories, raising wages and giving workers time to rest. He started programs for widows, orphans, and the elderly. The billionaire who once lived only for profit began to live for something greater. At first, his business partners resisted. This will cut into our profits, they argued. Why should we spend money on schools or hospitals? That is not our responsibility. But Kwame stood firm. It is my responsibility, he replied. And if you cannot see that, you do not belong in my company. His voice was so strong, so certain, that many could not argue further. Slowly they began to see the results. The community respected him more, workers gave their best with new loyalty, and even investors admired his boldness. Through it all, Abina stayed by his side, not as a woman dazzled by wealth, but as a partner guiding his vision. She reminded him that power meant nothing without purpose. In private their bond deepened. Kwame, who had once feared love, now found himself sharing his fears, his past, his dreams with her. He told her about the betrayal that had once broken him, the nights of silence he had endured, the walls he had built around his heart. Abina listened without judgment. She took his hand and said softly, "The past hurt you, but it also made you strong. Do not let it steal your future." For the first time in years, Kwame felt truly free. Not because of his wealth, not because of his empire, but because of the woman who stood beside him with gentle strength. One evening, as they walked together through one of the schools he had built, Kwame watched the children laughing and playing. He turned to Abina, his voice full of quiet wonder. "You have changed me," he said. Abina smiled softly. "No, Kwame. You changed yourself. I only reminded you of what was already in your heart." And in that moment, Kwame realized something powerful. The love he had once feared had not weakened him. It had given him a vision greater than profit, greater than power. It had given him a reason to live fully. The billionaire who once avoided love had found not only a partner but also a purpose. Together, he and Abina began to build something far richer than an empire, something that would outlast wealth, something that would remain even when the world forgot his fortune. They had built love, truth, and hope. The world was shocked when Kwame finally announced his choice. For weeks, there had been whispers, stories in newspapers, endless discussions on social media. Many had guessed, many had wondered, but no one truly believed that the great billionaire CEO, the man of iron discipline and power, would stand before the world and speak of love. He did not do it in secret. He did not hide. He stood in front of cameras at one of his company's grand events, Abina beside him. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied neatly, her smile gentle but steady. She looked nothing like the women of wealth who usually filled such halls. And yet, she stood taller than them all because beside her, Kwame's eyes shone with pride. "This is Abina," he said clearly, his voice echoing through the hall. "She is not only my partner in life, but also the one who reminded me that wealth means nothing without kindness, without purpose, without love." Gasps filled the room. Some clapped, some frowned, and some exchanged looks of disbelief. For a moment the air was thick with shock. But Kwame stood firm, his hand resting in Abina's, his gaze unshaken. Some still whispered, of course. "How can a billionaire choose a waitress?" they muttered. "He could have had anyone in the world." Others mocked her simple dress, her modest smile. But among the whispers, there were also voices of admiration. People began to see courage in his choice. They saw a man powerful enough to ignore the chains of status and expectation. They saw a woman who, without riches, had touched the heart of a man who thought love was impossible. From that day Abina's life changed forever. She was no longer just the girl who worked long hours in a small restaurant. She was now the woman who stood beside Kwame, the woman whose kindness had turned the path of a billionaire. Yet Abina remained the same at her core. She did not rush to wear diamonds or live in the glow of cameras. She carried herself with the same humility, the same patience, the same soft laughter that had first caught Kwame's heart. And because of that, people slowly began to respect her, not for her connection to Kwame, but for the person she truly was. Together, Kwame and Abina began to build a new story. It was not a story of power and fear, as people had once known Kwame for. It was a story of kindness and trust. At first, the world resisted. Journalists questioned his decisions, investors doubted his judgment, relatives pressed him to reconsider. But as the years passed, people could not ignore the changes his choices brought. Schools were rising in poor neighborhoods. Scholarships sent children to universities they had never dreamed of entering. Workers in his company spoke of respect, fair wages, and hope for their families. Hospitals were built, communities supported. Slowly, Kwame's empire was no longer only a name for power, it became a symbol of giving. And behind it all was Abina's gentle influence. She never demanded, never forced. She simply reminded him, again and again, of the value of kindness, of the beauty of lifting others. In private, their love grew deeper. For Kwame, it was like rediscovering a part of himself he thought had died forever. After 10 long years of silence, loneliness, and guarded walls, he had found warmth again. He had once believed love was weakness, a distraction that could only bring pain. But now he saw it for what it truly was, a strength greater than money, a power greater than fear. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from his balcony, Kwame turned to Abina. His voice was low but filled with emotion. "Do you know what you have given me?" he asked. Abina looked at him with her calm eyes. "What?" "You gave me back my heart," he said. "For 10 years I buried it. I told myself I would never love again. But you showed me that love is not a trap. It is freedom." Abina's eyes softened. She reached for his hand. "And you gave me something too. You gave me a place I never dreamed I would stand. You gave me courage to believe my life could be bigger than my struggles." Their fingers intertwined, and in that quiet moment, they both knew that their story was not about riches or titles. It was about finding each other in a world that had told them they could never belong. But belonging was exactly what they had found, in each other. The years went on, and people began to see their love not as a scandal but as an example. Young men and women spoke of them not for their wealth, but for their courage to choose love over pride. Workers told stories of how their lives improved because of Kwame's new vision. Children who studied in his schools dreamed bigger, knowing someone believed in them. And Abina, who once believed she was just a poor waitress, now walked with confidence. Not because of diamonds or luxury but because she had seen her kindness shape the world. Kwame too changed. His once cold, guarded eyes now carried warmth. He still worked hard, still led his empire, but no longer for the empty chase of power. Now he worked with purpose, knowing his wealth had meaning beyond himself. Together they proved something simple yet powerful, that love can change not only a heart but also an empire. At the core of it all, their story remained deeply human. A man who thought love was impossible found it in the most unexpected place. A woman who thought her life would always be ordinary discovered that her heart was extraordinary enough to transform a billionaire. Their journey was not easy. It came with whispers, judgment, and resistance. But in the end, their love silenced the noise. Kwame no longer walked alone in his glass penthouse at night. Abina no longer carried trays wondering if her life would ever change. They had each other. And with each other, they had found a happiness richer than gold, a strength stronger than power. For Kwame, love had returned after 10 long years. For Abina, life had given her a place she had never dreamed of. And together they built a story that would be remembered, not as a tale of wealth, but as a tale of love that defied the world.